Hello, beautiful people. It's Timotha, Lanae, and today I'm going to show you how to make quinoa bread. I already have a quinoa bread recipe on this channel, but it's a little more complex. This one is so fast and easy. You'll see how quick it is. Quinoa is a grain that is on Dr. Sebi's list. It's an alkaline grain that doesn't cause a lot of inflammation in the body. And so if you are trying to be gluten-free or just on a healing journey, quinoa bread might be the answer for you. So before you start making this, the first thing I would say is to preheat your oven to 420 degrees and get all your ingredients. All you're gonna need is quinoa. You need a cup of quinoa. You need a cup of spring water. And if you choose, you can use some Celtic salt, my favorite type of salt. I'll link to this Celtic salt and the quinoa in the description box below that I get. I like this quinoa because it is already pre-rinsed. If you have a different type of quinoa that's not pre-rinsed, you will need to rinse your quinoa so it doesn't have a bitter taste. But let's dive right into this. How to make it is really simple. Use a blender. I like the Vitamix. I'll link to some different Vitamix in the description box below. It's a high-powered blender, so it really gets stuff nice and creamy and blended well. So you take 1 cup of quinoa, pour that into your blender, and then you want to do 1 cup of spring water. And if you wanted to make more quinoa bread or double this recipe, you just would double 2 cups of quinoa, 2 cups of water, simple like that. And then whether or not you want salt, depending on, if you're dealing with high blood pressure, you may not want to add salt at all. I take a half a teaspoon of Celtic salt. But if you have, like I said, high blood pressure, you might want to do 1/4 teaspoon or no salt at all. You can also season this with other things. If you see my other quinoa bread recipe, I do season it up with roasted red pepper. I put some annatto in it. All of those things are on Dr. Sebi's alkaline list. So that you take those things, a cup of quinoa, cup of water, cup of Celtic salt, okay? And we're gonna blend it, and then I'll show you the next step after that. And remember, have your oven preheated to 420 degrees. But let's go ahead and blend this up. And so one thing I like to do when I'm blending, I have a little spatula here, and I'll go in, and you see how it kind of gets up on the sides. I'll go in and just smooth down, make sure I'll get the quinoa that's in the top of the blender out, put it down into the actual body of the blender, and then I'll get in the sides and get that quinoa that's not blended and push it down into the actual batter, okay? So this is a really nice bread that I actually use to, I use it as a side dish sometimes. I'll use it to make a wrap, and you can put, like, you see I have avocado spread recipes. I'll link to my healthy alkaline recipe series. I'll link that in the description box below. But you could make like a hummus sandwich with avocado, and veggie sandwich, things like that. But another yummy thing that I love is making a pizza out of it, using it for pizza crust. And I have a basil pesto sauce that I make just using fresh basil, and you can use like grapeseed oil, all of these things on Dr. Sebi's alkaline list. And then you could spread that over after you've cooked your actual crust. And because you don't want to put olive oil in the oven at a higher smoke point than it actually, I don't know the olive oil smoke point, but you don't want to cook it at the level at 420. It's way too hot. So you don't want it to go rancid when you cook it at a higher level. But it's just some really good things that you can do with this quinoa bread. Let's blend one more time. So we're getting it nice and smooth and creamy. You really want to get that batter all blended together really well, because that really will make or break whether or not this bread turns out good. So you can see kind of the consistency of it right now. You want it to be kind of like pancake batter. So I'm gonna add just a smidgen more water just to help the blending process. You don't want to make too much water because it'll be, if you put too much water in it, it'll be too runny. You don't want it to be too runny. It's just that you want it to be the perfect consistency. Nice and blended. So the thing about it is sometimes if it's not really high up in your blender, you know, then it's hard for the blades to for it to really get blended around. That's why you have to keep moving it to the center, because if it's not a whole lot of quinoa or a whole lot. So if I were to double this, it would blend much, much faster. But since it's not blended, since it's not a lot, it kind of will splatter off to the sides, you know, which makes it take a little bit longer to make sure that you're really blending it well. But it's very much so worth it when it's all said and done, because after this process, it's a piece of cake to finish this bread. You'll see. I'm also gonna do a recipe very soon on quinoa crackers. So make sure to subscribe for that recipe, because sometimes you just want a little bit of crunch. This bread turns out really good because I use this stone, I got this stone pizza pan. I love it, okay? The other thing you wanna do as you're preparing for this is take parchment paper and cut it in the shape of your pan. My other recipe, if you watch my other quinoa bread recipe, that's a little more savory, that has like the roasted red pepper and stuff in it, you'll see that I do that on a metal pan. But when I started using this stone pan, ooh, the texture of the quinoa bread is so delicious. So highly recommend picking up a stone pizza pan. I just got mine at my local grocery store, but I'll also see if I can find some and link to them below. I know that they have them on Amazon as well, but it's not expensive, but they're just really, they just make it have such a nice texture. My husband was like, ooh, you stepped up your quinoa bread game. You know, it's like, it just tastes so much better when you cook it on this stone pan as opposed to just the plain metal. But you definitely want to have the parchment paper on top. It makes cleanup much, much, much easier. Okay, let's blend one more time. Should do it. Yep, there we go. Now it has that nice creamy texture. So you can look in here, I'll show you close up so you can see. But like I said, if you double it, it blends much faster because it won't separate from the blades. But now you can see it's a much more of a creamy batter-like texture, consistency. And you just want to make sure, you know, that you don't have a lot of the quinoa beads in there. That's what can kind of happen. So now that you've done that, now that you've got it all nice and blended, and if it's at the nice creamy consistency, like I said, your oven is 420, preheated, ready to go. And then you have this parchment paper cut out in the shape of your pan. Hopefully you got you a stone pizza pan. If not, you can use the metal. I'm gonna blend one more time just because the perfectionist in me wants it to be a little more creamy, but it won't have to be that long. Just one moment, here we go. Daughter loves this bread. She loves it. It's really good. And if you haven't seen, I have a lot of alkaline bread recipes. I have one for spelt bread. I'm working on one for a sourdough bread. And so now you see this here, how it looks there. It's good. So now what we're gonna do, so subscribe for more recipes, especially for that sourdough recipe coming up. Sourdough bread is a little more complex to make, but it's well worth it, and it's really good for your gut. But the spelt bread recipe is pretty simple, and I have that on here. It's a flat bread, so check that one out as well. So now that you see I have the pizza pan right here, and we're gonna go ahead and pour our quinoa batter onto this. And I just pour it in the center, right into the center, into a little ball. Put it right there. And then what we're gonna do is just spread it out. So the trick is when you spread it out, you wanna make sure that you don't spread it too thin, because then it'll be kind of crunchy, and you wanna make it an even consistency and spread it so that it has a little bit of thickness, especially on the edges, so that the edges kind of have, you know how if you have pizza and the edges are kind of a little bit higher up, have that little lip to it, the little bounce, or not little bounce, but the little bump at the edge. You want to have that so that the edges aren't cracker-like, but the edges are nice and thick. So you'll be able to see as I spread this. This consistency of this turned out really good for this batter. So you just want to spread it around, keep it a nice thickness. Okay. And make sure that it's not too, like I said, too thin at the edges. So I'll hold it up to the camera after this so that you can kind of see how it is. But it's really a good, easy crust. And you see that if you were to have doubled it, you wouldn't have had to blend it nearly as much as I had to blend it, because it would have, because of how it would have been in the blender, it would have blended faster, and this would already be in the oven, you know, because once you pour it on here, it's just as simple as just spreading it like this. And so now you see the edges I'm keeping nice and thick, and I'm trying to keep it a similar depth throughout the whole thing. I want it to all be similar. You don't want any areas to dip, so you have to kind of spread it evenly across. And then I'll show you how it looks. You can kind of see that and see how the lip of it isn't real flat down. That's a nice size there. It'll rise a little bit, and so then what you're going to do is put it in the oven at 420, and then let it cook for about 15 minutes. Check it, and then once you feel like it's cooked a nice amount through on that side and not too wet and easy to flip, you just get a nice little either spatula the spatula to get underneath it and flip it over, cook it on the other side for about 8 minutes. And then make sure, like I said, it's not wet on the inside. Make sure it's cooked all the way through to your desired consistency. And that's it, it's done. So 15 minutes on one side, check it. If you feel like it needs a few more minutes before you flip it, you put it in another 3 to 5 minutes, and then flip it, cook it for another 8 to 10 minutes, take it out, it's ready to go. And I like to use a pizza slicer to just cut it. If I'm doing it for a side dish, you could just do the whole thing and make a pizza if you don't want to cut it, or you could cut it into different wedges for wraps and things like that. So this is the quinoa bread, how you make it and prepare it. It's really simple, and I'll have pictures that show you. Actually in the thumbnail you'll see the final actual picture of this quinoa bread. But it's delicious and nutritious. So hopefully you enjoyed this recipe. Let me know if you try it and how it turns out for you and how you like to use your quinoa bread. I'm Timotha Lanae. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if this video was helpful for you. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. God bless. And I will see you in the next video.